So when we explored, what were implementation lessons with CLS, this topic came up as something that kind of surprised us or took us by surprise, and so we figured it out. And I don't recall discussing it, so I figured we just attach it alongside. So hopefully we could go through it quick. And that is specifically, CLS, layout instability, has this input exclusion concept, and it's a little bit tricky to get right necessarily. Hopefully it should be pretty easy. So as background, the layout instability API actually reports every single layout shift for every single animation frame. But there is signal about had recent input and the timestamp of the most recent input alongside those events. And CLS is defined to filter out shifts which happened immediately after an input event. Okay. So in the spec, there's mention of this thing. And so sort of for anybody who's not super familiar, I'm sure many of us are, the why of it is, CLS is meant to measure the overall amount of unexpected layout shift. And shifts which come immediately before user input, I think are especially concerning. You reach for that add to cart button and it gets replaced with the buy now button. That's a bad experience. On the other hand, shifts which come immediately after a user interaction might actually be fully expected. If you do hit that add to cart button and you get a little bit of DOM relayout because there's some response to your user action, that's entirely expected. Makes sense? So what counts? Mouse down, key down, pointer down, change, but not gestures that initiate scroll. So pointer down followed by drag will not become an input exclusion. Flicks, that sort of thing. So that's what counts, sort of discrete events. And I know very early on we included another consideration, which is resizing the viewport. Right? It makes sense that when the user resizes their window, opens something like DevTools, this would cause an expected relayout and move things around. So this is not an interaction, but it's still the shifts that happen in response to a layout change report as though they had a recent input. That is how it's implemented. And so we learned over time that there's actually lots of these other types of interactions where they're not really interactions with the renderer. It's not the user interacting with the page content, but it's the same spirit of the thing. So one feature that the browser has is zoom. You could zoom in the contents of the page. In Chrome, and I'm sure other browsers, there's actually multiple ways of doing it. You could sort of pinch zoom, where you have like a draggable thing. It doesn't cause a relayout, but you could also change the device pixel ratio where things relay out to be larger. And that is an intended layout shift that the user introduces. There's a translate feature. So if you go to a non-native language site, you might be prompted by the browser to translate, and it actually does like text replacement, and that will cause things to resize and then therefore shift around. And it happens after the user asks for this. And so it is an expected set of layout shifts. Just clicking back forward buttons in browser UI, the page can handle that with history API and then cause an expected layout UI change. If you click a blue link within the tab content, like within the web contents, or if you hit a back button that calls history.back, that will naturally get excluded because there will be an interaction. But if you interact with the browser, that wouldn't normally get caught. So we have to sort of plumb that through. This isn't, I think, implemented in Chrome yet, but we at least thought of this, that system notifications, if you use push messaging and then native notifications, and you have a native notification fire, the user clicks the notification, the website gets that event, therefore causes some sort of UI change in response. It's a very roundabout path, but it's a direct layout that was induced by the user action. There are also features like find in page. So find in page typically will only scroll the contents, which isn't typically an exclusion event, but find in page can actually match hidden text content and expand collapsed elements. And so there could be shifting going on that happened because the user was doing this thing. Sort of niche, sort of rarely found, but it does pop up. And the other two that came up often for us was visibility changes in BF cache at various historical points in the Chrome implementation. The very first frame after a tab becomes visible might be visually different than the last time it became backgrounded or not visible or out of BF cache. And so we don't have a 500 millisecond exclusion window, but that very first frame should be ignored for CLS purposes. You can imagine in the background constant updates. I put in an example like a calendar or a weather app or something like that. It's not even visible too, because if there's an arbitrary amount of time with the contents not being visible and then it becomes visible, it's not going to cause a visible shift. And I believe that's it. So yeah, we think all of those are in the same spirit of the original intention behind exclusion windows. And there probably are more that we haven't found yet, so we'll keep reporting them. There's an issue filed that this hasn't been added to spec, or at least not all of these have, and so issue 110 tracks a bunch of these that I mentioned today, and we can keep adding them. Maybe folks have other ideas or immediately some use cases pop to mind, so let us know. And I think that's it.